Hi, welcome to Teen Pride Book Talks. My name is Lucy, and this is the program on AADL TV, where each episode I take a few minutes to talk about a young adult book that is representative of and inclusive of folks in the LGBTQIA plus community. The book that I am going to be talking about today is called I'll Take Everything You Have, and this is by James Klise. This book is an historical novel. It's also sort of an adventure novel. It's got a lot of interesting facets to it that make it pretty rich. It takes place in Chicago in 1934. This was a very interesting time in Chicago. And the main character is a young man named Joe Garb, who has come to Chicago from a rural area of Illinois because he wants to make money to save his farm, his mother's and his farm. His father died in an accident a while back, so it's just Joe and his mother that run the farm, and they are really about to go under. So Joe comes to Chicago to stay with his cousin Bernie and hopefully get a job to earn this money. He does move in with Bernie and he gets a job working at a hotel. Bernie also pulls him into this more shady job, which is that Joe will take French lessons with the idea that everybody else in those French lessons will be rich people traveling to France. The reason Joe's doing this is that he will then collect names and addresses and travel dates and give them back to his cousin Bernie. That's all he has to do. And then Bernie gives him to whoever he is working for, and they go in and rob the houses. So Joe does feel a little bit torn about this, but he also justifies it by thinking, well, all I'm doing is taking the lessons and sharing the information. At the same time, Joe meets somebody in his French class named Raymond, who is a rich kid, pretty carefree, and they sort of have an attraction. Raymond is much more open about it. Joe knows that he feels that way, but is hesitant, a little bit scared, a little unsure. And he goes over to Raymond's house to start practicing French with him. It eventually turns into a little bit more. At the same time, Joe has also met somebody named Eddie who works to deliver alcohol to the hotel. And he and Eddie have shared looks that are meaningful, and Joe's interested in getting to know Eddie better. He finds himself trying to be outside when the alcohol is being delivered. It's very interesting historically in Chicago because Prohibition had recently ended, and there's still a lot of crime around the world of alcohol. And you get the sense that Eddie and Bernie both are tied up with this underbelly of crime and the way that people who lost a lot of money in the Depression maybe are starting to make more money, but it's also this black market. So you sort of get this mystery sense about it. There are adventurous parts of this book too as it progresses. And so Raymond and Eddie are very different. With Raymond, Joe actually goes by a different name because he has come into this French class introducing himself as Charles. So he's Charles with Raymond and spends time with his really rich family and is educated by Raymond on the sort of queer unwritten rules in Chicago and how to build what Raymond calls a syndicate, so meaning a group of queer male friends who support one another and find things to do with each other, but also at the same time, none of this is legal, so keeping a watchful eye out for times when they might get caught or busted. So, for instance, from Raymond, Joe learns that if you walked down State Street in Chicago outside of Marshall Field this time and you were wearing a red tie, you were a man wearing a red tie, that would be an indication assigned to other men and you're interested in connecting with them. Also, Raymond shows Joe his address book, which is full of names and numbers he can call, and he puts after some of these names MD. This way, if his parents see it, they assume he's friends with these doctors. What it actually stands for is Marvelous Deviant. These subversions are some of what Raymond has learned about and passes on to Joe in order to be able to exist as a queer person, not only exist as a queer person in Chicago at this time, but also be able to have relationships with other queer people. With Eddie, Joe can be himself because Eddie knows that he works at the hotel. Eddie comes from a much more blue-collar working family. So there's a huge difference in these two men that Joe has met, but he learns a lot from each of them. And it's almost like they become these two halves of this education. Some of the things that I really loved about this book were the history, the queer history. The author, James Klise, named some really good books and exhibits that he went to and that he researched, that he read in order to learn about the queer history at this time in Chicago. Historical books like this are so important because they show you that queer people have always existed. So sometimes you had to look a little bit harder to find where they were. The other thing that James Klise did in researching this book was he reviewed every issue of the Chicago Tribune for the summer of 1934, the time frame in which this book took place in Chicago. And I think what that does is that really builds a sense of what's going on in the city, how the city looks, how the city feels. And that is very obvious when you read this book. You really get a sense of Chicago being almost a character, but you can envision it, you can almost smell it, you can feel and hear the busyness. And you also understand that there's all these little pieces going on at the same time, some of them connected, some of them not, some of them legal, some of them not. And that nobody is necessarily who they say they are. Joe thinks that he's deceiving people, but he learns that a lot of other people might be deceiving him too in small and large ways. The main characters in this book are really well developed, and you do get a sense of some of the supporting cast as well. The author does a good job at painting a villain, and that adds to this adventure story, this crime story, and this mystery. So it's a lot of things. It's a historical novel, it's an adventure novel, it's a queer history. It's also a coming of age book. And one of the ways that Joe is able to grow up a little bit and come of age and also learn about who he is and learn about how he wants to continue to be that person comes from this dual education and these dual connections with Raymond and Eddie. He also learns about various ways to survive and make money, and that sometimes it's difficult to only work within the confines of the law if you're not making enough money. He works with people in the hotel who want more for themselves, who want to enjoy some pleasant things, some moments with people that they care about, and are finding ways that are slightly hidden and less reliable to make an income, but they have to do these kind of things in order to supplement what they can earn in a job. There's a huge difference between those people at the hotel that Joe interacts with and then the world that he interacts with just from becoming part of that French class and having this friendship with Raymond and seeing how Raymond lives, meeting Raymond's parents. There is a socioeconomic discussion going on as well. I really recommend this book. Even if you don't think you like historical fiction, it's got so many other pieces to it that are really interesting that I think there's something that many people could find that they get out of it. I would like to learn more about Chicago at this time, particularly the LGBTQ plus community in Chicago in 1934 and the surrounding years. This is a good start. Thank you for joining me.